I'm Leo Panich. This is Steffen Lehndorff. This evening has been sponsored by the Socialist Register, the Center for Social Justice, and the Socialist Project. And I'm really honored and happy to be able to introduce Steffen Lehndorff to you. Stefan is a lifelong political activist, a former member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party in West Germany, one of those who tried to lead from inside the Central Committee a reform movement at the end of the 1980s, at the time that Gorbachev was trying to construct a democratic version of communism. He is now in academic circles and in intellectual circles, now better known for the work he does as a senior and well-known researcher in Germany, but really across Europe, at one of Germany's most impressive labor research institutes, now associated with the University of Duisburg. When I first met him in Frankfurt about 4 years ago, after I'd given a talk at EG Metall, we had a very long talk, and he was just then doing a remarkable comparative study of the welfare states of Europe and what was happening to them. This most recent book of his, which is a collection of phenomenal essays, really, I've read it and it's really instructive and informative. It's published by the European Trade Union Institute, and it's called The Triumph of Failed Ideas, which we've labeled this talk. And it's about the European models of capitalism in crisis and the extent to which they have been subjected to the triumph of neoliberalism. Although I would also argue that the European models of capitalism is also a failed idea. But that's another discussion perhaps. In any case, Stefan let me know that he was going to be in Montreal for a labor working time conference, and I prevailed upon him to take the train and come down to Toronto. He told me that arriving this afternoon that the train reminded him of what used to be the speed trains in Germany in the 1990s. And I was actually quite impressed. I thought he was going to say the 1950s. So. That's really quick. Anyway, Stefan, we're very pleased to have you here. You have a very informed and involved audience tonight, much better than if we had it at the university. And I'm sure you're pleased with that as well, so please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Leo. Thank you very much. Thank you for the flowers, as we say in German. Dear colleagues or comrades, whatever you may find suitable. As Leo's just told you, a couple of years ago, we did a research, EU-funded research project in 10 European countries on the changes of European models of capitalism of the past 20 years. And we enjoyed working together, but we had only one problem. Our project ended when the crisis began. So what we had to tell to the academic or political public was something most people at that time in 2008, 2009 didn't really want to hear. Even though I think it was quite okay because we described and we analyzed how the pre-crisis changes in numerous European countries prepared the grounds for that particular crisis. So it was okay, but we didn't analyze obviously the crisis and how our models, our respective models fared during the crisis. So what we did was we met again last year with little funding, just from a left-wing European foundation, and had exactly this discussion. How did the European models of capitalism in our 10 countries fare during the crisis? And we sort of tried to trace the line from the pre-crisis developments and changes to the recent upheavals within our countries. And it ended, it's inevitable when researchers meet, with this book, Triumph of Failed Ideas. I took that title from an op-ed of Paul Krugman in the New York Times. He said, I think 2 years ago, he wrote that free market fundamentalism has failed absolutely, but it's politically stronger than ever. And we thought this is a good title for what we have to tell about Europe, about the EU and in particular the Eurozone countries. Though I must make the distinction between possibly the United States on the one hand and Europe on the other, in one respect. On the level of ideology, nobody, no politician in Europe would dare today to hail the free market. Maybe in contrast to the United States, to what I read about the US, everything is possible there. In Europe, this would not be feasible for politicians to do. They take, well, to continue a neoliberal policy approach, they take the soaring public debt as an excuse for austerity policy, and they take this as a lifebelt or a sheet anchor for the continuation of neoliberal policies, as I will tell you in a few minutes. So I think this is a very distinctive difference between Europe and possibly the United States. The triumph of failed ideas is not handling the failed ideas openly, explicitly. The failed ideas come through the back door, through the austerity policy. What's in the book? It's basically 10 country analyses. And I have to say, I'm not making an advertisement tour here. You don't have to buy this book. You can download it from the website of the European Trade Union Institute, ETUI. These people will provide you the link if needed. So it's downloadable, the whole book, for free. So the advertisement I make is the advertisement for the content, really, and not for selling the book. It's 10 country chapters, 10 country analyses, plus 2 cross-cutting analyses, 2 cross-cutting chapters, one about trade union approaches, in particular in Germany, about what the author calls crisis corporatism during the crisis and how it fared, and the other one about EU policy approaches, the austerity approach at the EU level, which is very important and very interesting. And of course, one cross-cutting chapter, which is my introduction, obviously. So, I have to improvise a bit because I wanted to explain you some graphs which I cannot explain anymore. So I have to think about how to continue. The starting point is possibly that in today's Europe, everybody is looking at Germany. Germany is, in most parts of Europe, in wide parts of the public of many European countries, not all countries, but many European countries, as a role model. The Germans tell you how to do it, how to deal with the crisis, how to manage to get out of the crisis, how to be economically successful, how to become competitive. This led at a party congress of the Christian Democratic Party, which is the leading government party in Germany, so, well, it's the conservative party of our country, a close collaborator with our Chancellor, Angela Merkel, the leader of the parliamentary group, is a very important person, said at the party convention, proudly, Europe is speaking German now, which was quite symbolic. And this is a clever guy, he knows what he's talking about. So what's behind that? The European Union, and in particular the Eurozone, is experiencing the worst crisis, the worst imaginable crisis ever. So what's behind that crisis? Behind that crisis is basically the ill-constructed currency union we have in Europe. So the European Union covers 27 countries now, out of which 17 have joined the currency union, the Eurozone. It's a currency union without a transfer union, which is hard to understand for people who do not live in Europe. If you look at the United States, for instance, or other countries, wherever you have a currency union, you will have some sort of joint taxation, transfers from one region to the other. This is what the United States have. This is what we have in Germany. We used to have for decades in West Germany, within the Federal Republic of Germany. This is normal for any currency union. It's based on joint taxation and redistribution of funds. This is a currency union. The euro is a currency union without a transfer union, which is very hard to imagine, very hard to understand. Secondly, the European Central Bank is solely obliged to watch the inflation rate. Nothing else in the world. Not the unemployment, not the growth, nothing. Just inflation. This is the old tradition of the German Bundesbank. Just to focus on inflation. Low inflation rate, that's all, that's it. They are no lender of last resort for the state, or the states in this case. That means that governments that have to take recourse on sovereign bonds are solely dependent on the capital market. They have to sell their bonds at the capital market. No other way. The central bank will not give a cent to governments. They give a lot of money, billions, to banks. And these banks may give the money to the government, but the central bank will give not a single cent, not a single euro to any government. These are two, if you like, cornerstones of the construction of the Eurozone, which are unique for a currency union. On top of it, or one should say long before this, the rationale for European economic policy was established, well, institutionalized already long before the euro in the early 1990s with the so-called Maastricht Agreement. It was a joint understanding that governments in the EU must reduce their deficit to 3% and their public debt to 60% of GDP. This was so to speak, the overall objective. The single most important objective of economic policy within the EU. Everything else came and has come behind it. First come the limits to public deficit and public debt. So this is the third cornerstone, which has become the cornerstone of the euro. What has been the rationale behind? the driving force behind this construction of the euro was Germany, the German governments and the German Bundesbank. Why that? The rationale is what I like to call the German business model. Germany has the foreign trade with the European Union makes up to 60% of the whole of foreign trade of Germany, and the foreign trade with the Eurozone amounts to 40% of the whole of German foreign trade. And the idea, the business model behind this particular construction of the Eurozone has been that Germany, which is the strongest economy in Europe, has a safe environment with stable exchange rates for its, well, business expansion. This was, well, to boil it down, this has been the bottom line of the business model within Europe. A safe and stable economic environment for business expansion within Europe. Fixed currency, exchange rates, and stable interest rates. What happened after the introduction of the euro? The model worked perfectly. First of all, for Germany. Oh, I should say not for Germany, it worked perfectly for German business. Because the German economy had an enormously soaring current account surplus over the past 10 years. It soared to levels unseen before, the surplus. In earlier times, when German competitiveness led to imbalances worldwide or within Europe, the reaction was the revaluation of the Deutschmark. This mechanism was abolished by the introduction of the euro. So, for the first time ever, current surplus could soar in unseen dimensions. The other side of the same coin was that this model worked very well for the economies of other countries as well. If you take Southern European countries, the general interest, the level of interest rates was much lower than before, which was hailed by business in these countries. Gave way to enormous growth rates in Southern European countries. Growth rates in Southern European countries were much higher than in Germany, based on cheap capital, if you like, and in some countries at least, going hand in hand with high private indebtedness. Like a growth circle, if you like, mutual reinforcement of low interest rates, strong growth, and high private debt. And possibly in one country, not only high private debt, but also high public debt. The only country was Greece. In some countries, such as Ireland, but also the UK in particular, but also Spain, expansion of consumer expenditure was to a large extent based on private indebtedness based on mortgages. So So they had, for instance, in Spain, most prominently, an enormous boom in the construction industry and in mortgages. It was really a bubble, and this bubble was to a considerable extent fed by the profits of German capital. Why was growth in Germany lower than in all other European countries, even though German capital was the biggest profiteer, if you like, of that zone, Eurozone? The reason was that growth was, to a large extent, sometimes almost exclusively based on export growth, linked to a stagnation of the domestic market. And the domestic market did stagnate because we had, on average, stagnating wages. So German business, in particular export business, but also banks, benefited extremely, to a high extent, by this model, but the large parts of the society were in a way detached from that economic success. Many leftist people in Germany argue that this was part of a so-called wage dumping. German capital was successful due to wage dumping. And I do not agree with this view. The point is that German manufacturing is highly competitive based on product quality. It's an impressively innovative manufacturing industry. If you not just take the automotive industry, which is best known, obviously, and I see these Mercedes and BMWs driving in Canada too. Possibly even more important is the engineering, the machine tooling industry in Germany. This is really the core of it, the heart of it, of the German business success abroad. So this is the basis: product and service quality, product innovation, process innovation. But on top of it, increasing price competitiveness due to wage stagnation, low inflation rate in Germany, within Germany, which gives an additional competitive advantage and gives way to that enormous current account surplus we experienced since the year 2000-2001. So what's behind that wage stagnation? Many people argue, again, leftist people in Germany, maybe also abroad, that there was some implicit or hidden agreement with the trade unions to foster, to boost German competitiveness abroad, and you know, all that term wage moderation. Wage moderation is a wonderful term, and wage moderation helped to produce that price competitiveness and stagnation, or even reduction of labor unit costs over the past decade. There may be some truth to it, but it's only a side aspect. If we look at the wage increases as agreed in collective bargaining, we will find that the highest wage increases were agreed upon in industries such as the chemical industry and the metalworking industry, which are the ones which are most exposed to international competition. So, wage moderation geared to foster price competitiveness would look differently. They had the highest wage increases as agreed in collective bargaining. Over the past decade, wage increases nominal wage increases in the metalworking industry, by and large, matched inflation rate plus average productivity increase in the whole of the economy, which is what we call distribution neutral in the macroeconomic sense. If we compare these wage increases as agreed in collective bargaining with wage increases, agreed wage increases in private services and in public service, we will find that in some large industries, such as retailing, the largest private service industry, and in the public service, wage increases as collectively agreed were a bit more than half of wage increases in metalworking and the chemical industry. So the first thing is that the first, explanation of wage stagnation in Germany over, 1 decade, which is quite a lot. The first explanation is the breakup of traditional pattern bargaining, which we used to have in former decades in the Federal Republic of Germany. Pattern bargaining across industries. So the metal workers used to be the pace setters, but others matched by and large, their wage increases in collective bargaining. So this is important to realize that this pattern bargaining system has virtually broken up to various reasons. One of the reasons is, maybe the most important one, that I take the two single most important reasons. If I take the example of the retail trade, we used to have a system of extension of collective agreements, which we have in many European countries. So unions and employers strike a deal, and the government says this deal is collectively binding for the whole of the industry, whether or not companies are part of the employers' association. This is, for instance, what happens in France and continues to happen in France, even under conservative governments. They have collective bargaining coverage rate of roughly 90% in France, whereas trade union density is roughly at 7%. It's incredible. So, it's the most extreme example in Europe, really. So we had, in many industries, this system of extension of collective agreements. This system was virtually dismantled by the umbrella organizations of the employers in the 1990s and governments, in particular the social democratic government we had from 1998 to 2005. I think it was 2005, yeah. So they helped most efficiently to dismantle this system of collective extension, which means that in large private service industries, the impact of bargaining weakened dramatically. Second, if I take the example of the public service, privatization on the one hand and tax cuts on the other exerted an enormous pressure on the service sector union. We have a large service sector union in Germany, which covers both private and public services. And they had a very, very hard time, and they were given a hard time, first of all due to privatization, which really dismantled the whole architecture of collective bargaining in large parts of the public services, and on the other, tax cuts, which decreased tax income, in particular on the regional level, and the regional employers exerted enormous pressure on the unions to agree on virtually stagnating real wages, or even less than that. So the indirect effects of tax cuts were very, very important for this wage stagnation as a whole. And finally, last but not least, we had the infamous labor market reforms. You may have heard of the Hartz labor market reforms in Germany. Well, in Europe it's a famous name. In 2003 and 4, developed by the social democratic government of that time. It was a partial dismantlement of the unemployment insurance system, which gave way to, again, enormous pressure on wages in all sectors which were not covered by collective agreements. One commentator of the Financial Times in Germany once wrote, "The Hartz reform have poisoned the rest of Europe," and this is exactly the point. The enormous pressure on wages as an indirect effect of tax cuts and labor market reforms contributed massively to the development of a large low-wage sector in Germany, which on average ended up with the stagnation or even slight decrease of average wages in the whole of the economy. The low-wage sector in Germany today covers about 23% of all workers. 23%. In the UK, which has been the role model of neoliberalism in Europe, it's 24 or 25. So this is, if you like, a downside of the German model, which many people actually have never heard of. The other side of the same coin was an enormous boost to profits in that period of time until the crisis, and these profits fed the bubble everywhere in the world. It fed the bubble in Spain, the mortgage bubble, in Ireland, the mortgage bubble in Ireland, and it fed also the subprime bubble in the United States. German banks were heavily involved in the subprime business in the US. Now came the crisis. And in the crisis, all of a sudden, the scenery changed almost overnight. What happened? First of all, employers who were shocked were in manufacturing. They were focused on export success, and their export markets broke down from overnight. So they were so shocked that they thought, if we dismiss workers now, our skilled staff, and one has to know that about 2/3 of all blue-collar and white-collar workers in Germany have their qualification basis is occupational training, vocational training. So most workers are skilled and qualified, if you like, and which is really one of the strengths of the so-called German model, one has to say. It's a very conservative approach to education, skilling of people. Very conservative and very powerful, very efficient, and very effective. They were afraid that they would lose important parts of their skilled workforce overnight. So they were prepared to strike deals, compromises with the unions, and there was this tripartite agreement on what we call short-time working schemes, which is a tripartite funding of reduction of working hours, which are, well, and the salaries lost, if you like, are partly subsidized and replaced by government funds, the labor administration. So it's a tripart funding, if you like, of working time reduction for periods of crisis. It had not been used for the past 20 years. In the course of the neoliberal the neoliberal success story and belief in neoliberal fundamentals, they forgot about this scheme. But in the crisis, all of a sudden, they were so much interested in this scheme, and everybody wanted to use it. They were struck by the dramatic developments during the crisis, in the first months of the crisis. And secondly, we have many workers' flexible working time organization, and this also was used as a buffer. So we have what we call working time accounts. So if you work more, you put these extra hours on working time accounts. You don't. It's not traditional overtime, which you get paid with a premium, but you put it on an account. And the ideology is, if you want to have a few time out, you take of what you have on your account. But in reality, it's obviously much more complicated, and it's mostly employer-driven, not employee-driven. But in the crisis, these accounts too were used to a large extent to buffer the employment impacts of the crisis. Second, of course, stimulus packages, which had been dismissed before, fundamentally dismissed by the government. All of a sudden, they used these stimulus packages, and there was a new approach to social partnership, crisis corporatism, as it is called in this book. For instance, the short-time working schemes need to be organized at the establishment level by management in collaboration with the Works Council, if there is a Works Council. So there was a real a boost in collaboration at all levels, and cooperation and social partnership or corporatism at all levels, including in particular the establishment level. And it brought many credits to the unions and to the Works Council that they had this strategic approach, hand in hand with management, to safeguard jobs. The funny thing is that those institutions and policy approaches that had survived the neoliberal policy approach before the crisis helped to get through the crisis without major losses in employment. That's the punchline of it. Those elements that survived the pre-crisis neoliberalism helped to get out of the crisis without major damages on the labor market. And this was, if you like, the beginning of the success story of the German model, the new success story in Europe. Before the crisis, it was what economists call a beggar my neighbor approach, beggar my neighbor policy. In this case, by the strongest economy, which is quite unusual, beggar my neighbor. Since the crisis, it's a beggar and lecture thy neighbor policy. And the crucial thing, as I said at the beginning, the crucial thing has been really the focus on public debt and public deficit. Everybody knows that public debt and deficit in almost all European countries soared during the crisis and due to the crisis. For instance, in Germany, before the crisis, public debt relative to GDP was about at 60%. Now it's over 80%. And this is a moderate increase. In Ireland, it was at 30% before the crisis, and it's about at 130 or 40% now. This is the most dramatic increase. So everybody knows it's due to the crisis. It's a product of the crisis, not the reason of the crisis, it's not the root of the crisis. But policy is focused on reduction of debt as a way out of the crisis, which does not make sense if you think logically, or Yeah, logically. But it's what it's all about, and for some reason it's possible to transport that via the media into the public and to make people believe, yeah, if we stick to austerity, everything will become better. And I'll give you one example. You know that Spain is one of the most problematic cases in the euro crisis. Possibly heard about that. It's a very dramatic situation. They have an unemployment rate of, say, 23–24%, youth unemployment of 50%. So it's incredible. It's as bad maybe as in Greece, even though they have a much stronger economic basis. Before the crisis, they had a public debt to GDP ratio of about 40%, and we in Germany had 60%. Now they have 60%, we in Germany have more than 80%. But everybody at the EU level, in German politics, in the media, talks about the debt problem in Spain. You know, this is how things are managed in a way, politically. It's one of the deficit sinners, as they call them, the deficit sinners, even though, well, the deficit now is high because they are driven into a deeper, ever deeper deepening crisis, but they are not a debt sinner because their debt were lower than the debt of Germany. So their economic problems have other roots, different roots than the debt, public debts. But this is the trick, if you like, which works up to now, has worked quite well. And again, behind it is the German business model, because Germany continues to benefit for the time being from this crisis. For instance, we have German business has extremely low interest rates and benefits from these low interest rates in this crisis, even though well, we have, and in particular also the public household benefit from the crisis. They, for government bonds, they get they have to pay 2% or less than 2%, and the inflation rate is above 2. So they get money while selling government bonds at the moment. It's an absolutely interesting situation, and Germany really benefits, for the German economy for the time being, it benefits from the situation. But which is equally important is the dogmatism of the leading personnel, if you like, the leading actors, not just the government, also the Deutsche Bundesbank. They are monetarist dogmatists, dogmatics, and this combination is interesting because they are far from having this pragmatic approach, which is typical for, say, North American neoliberals. The Federal Reserve Bank in the United States is absolutely pragmatic, whereas the Deutsche Bundesbank is absolutely, strictly monetarist and in a very dogmatic manner. And everybody is amazed about that German approach, but they stick to it. I think it's a mixture, it's a combination of dogmatism and economic interest behind. Obviously, this approach, now I'm really talking too long, but since nobody's sleeping yet, I'll take a few more minutes. This economic approach is driving more and more countries into an ever deepening economic crisis at the moment, which obviously leads to increasing public deficits, because if the economy shrinks, you can't cut the budgets at the same speed, really. It's like it's a simple calculation, really, but which tells us that shrinking out of a debt crisis, public debt crisis, is virtually impossible. But this is what they are trying to do, or imposing on governments and countries. And they are driving these countries not just in economic crises, in ever-deepening recessions, in particular Greece, but also Spain and Portugal. they are imposing so-called structural reforms. So what are structural reforms? It's an old, well, IMF, Washington Consensus term, which has always meant deregulation of the labor market. And I tell you what they are doing in Greece and in Spain, not just because these governments want to do it, but because the EU, and in particular the German government, tells them you have to do this unless you get no further support for your public, well, to deal with your public debt. What are they doing in Greece and in Spain? It's the full Monty of neoliberal labor market reforms. Weakening of dismissal protection. And the headline for all this, what I'm going to tell you now, the headline is fighting the public debt. One has to remind that. It's interesting. Weakening of dismissal protection. Precedence of firm level over sector collective agreements. Suspension of extension of collective agreements, what they done in Germany earlier. Greater leeway for temporary contracts. This is particular in Greece. Reduction of minimum wage in the private sector. Dramatic reduction of the minimum wage in Greece. It's on a poverty level now. In Spain, the same weakening of dismissal protection, precedence of firm level over sector collective agreements. They're trying to dismantle virtually the architecture of the collective bargaining system in Spain. No more limits for consecutive temporary contracts. This is particularly important for Spain because up to now it was allowed to have 6 consecutive temporary contracts in a series, which already helped to provide for 90% of all new employment contracts be based on to have a temporary basis. 1/3 of all Spanish workers have a temporary contract. It's a record in Europe. So they are going further down that road. No more limits for freeze of the minimum wage in the private sector. Pension age at 67. It's another export success of the German government because they introduced it in Germany, and now they want that everybody else does it in Europe. You know, that's a success model, as I said. Now this is under the headline of fight against public debt. They're doing these things, and they sell it in such a way, saying, we know that public debt is not the whole story. We know that very well. There are problems, balance problems within Europe. We have current account deficit countries. We know all that. Current account deficit is rooted in a lack of economic competitiveness, and in order to improve competitiveness, we have to do all these structural reforms. That's the rationale. That's how that's set. Now I'm almost finished. I wanted to say at the end, I wanted to say 2 things. First of all, in the mid-1990s, I read a book of some colleagues of the Economic Policy Institute in Washington. The title of the book was Beware the US Model. At that time, the US model was a role model for the whole world. It was the role model of the Washington Consensus. And in this book, they simply explain how it works, the importance of the low-wage sector, the importance of dismantling of labor market institutions, and they warned the rest of the world, please don't follow our way. And today I would like to say, beware the German model, because the labor market deregulation, which we have experienced over the past 15 years, contributed massively to that price competitiveness via the back door, on top of the highly efficient manufacturing industry, and contributed to these imbalances within Europe, which are so difficult to overcome. So the prescriptions derived from the alleged success of the German economy are disastrous for the countries where they are applied. So what's the way out? And this is really just to give some, well, to give some keywords for the discussion, possibly. And I must say that the way out is rather weak in this book. We were happy to put together our analyses about the changes of pre-crisis models, contribute to the development of the crisis, and how these models are further demolished and dismantled during the crisis. It's rather short. The alternatives way out is the weakest thing, but we, well, frankly, we did not dare to take this on board too, and for this project. It should be the next project, really. What's the way out? But there are some say 5% of the content of the book is dedicated on this, and I will tell you the most important keywords, maybe. There's a short-term approach at the economic level, which is a different role of the European Central Bank, in order, say, if you like, to buy time, as I say. Joint public debt, in one way or the other. There are different models being discussed. Joint public debt within the Eurozone, and public debt independent from the capital market, which is absolutely crucial for countries like Spain or Italy or Portugal, who have to pay, which have to pay about 5 or 6 or even more % from their government bonds. It's impossible to survive such a situation. This is to ease the situation in the short run. On top of that, what was strategically needed is what I started with, a transfer union. A currency union which is underpinned by a transfer union. Union of funds which are invested strategically to improve or to develop new economic development models in our European and Eurozone countries. And third element, a democratic superstructure. What we have now is a virtual lack of democracy within the Eurozone, within this currency union. It's all decisions taken by governments at the European level, and much of it has not to be acknowledged by parliaments. And if it has to be acknowledged by parliaments, in those countries with the biggest problems, the parliamentary majority is being imposed by Germany, supported by the French government so far. Let's see what the 5th of May brings us. And executed by the European Commission. And I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. Before the latest parliamentary elections in Portugal, 1.5 years ago, they had a deep crisis, sovereign bond crisis in Portugal. They had to refinance their public debt at an interest rate of more than 6 or 7 or 8%. So it was impossible. They needed support from the European Union. So what did the European Union tell them? They said, it was 1 month before the Portuguese parliamentary election. They told them, you agree on these measures, so austerity measures, labor market reform measures. And the government party said yes. It was a social democratic government. They said yes. Then they told the conservative opposition, which was likely to win the majority, which actually happened. And now, do you say yes too? And if you don't say yes, you won't get the money. And the Conservatives said, yes, we will. So both majority parties agreed on the austerity program imposed by the EU. Then were the elections, and I mean, I wonder why Portuguese went to these elections at all. And the second, it's a very recent example. They're going to have these elections in France. And François Hollande has stated that they want to renegotiate the austerity pact. I can tell you, if you don't know it, if you're interested, what's that about? The austerity pact at the European Union level. You want to renegotiate it in order to extend it onto growth-oriented measures, and he wants to increase public expenditures in France in order to boost to support the economy and boost employment. The EU commissioner in charge with public budgets, who's Finn, by the way, this Finnish commissioner told in an interview in a German newspaper, well, the French must be very careful. I mean, please keep in mind, they have their election in, I think, in 2 weeks. They have the election. And he says now, please, France, keep in your minds that if you do not meet the austerity targets, you will have difficulties, as other countries face difficulties who did not meet the austerity targets. So he tells before the elections, in a way, to the French public, transported via a German newspaper, which is widely perceived, of course, in France, if somebody like him says something like that. Please keep in mind, you will be punished. I mean, this is what I would call a fundamental lack of democracy, because this gentleman has not been elected by anybody. He's been hired by an agreement, as any other commissioner, agreement between the governments. There is a European Parliament, but he does not have to report to this Parliament for what he's doing now, which is obviously a growing conflict between the European Parliament and the European Commission. All these questions are not resolved. We have a fundamental lack of democracy in Europe. So this is the third cornerstone of any change, to reinforce democracy. And the bottom line really is, which is so hard to understand or to imagine if you're not a European, and it's equally, almost equally hard to understand if you are a European. Normally you would say, if I want to change something, I change it in my country and it will work in some way. Something will happen if I change things in my country. In Europe, the things are much more complicated. You have to change things at a European level, which needs an agreement between governments. So many governments would have to change their approach in order to make it possible for an individual country to change, say, the austerity approach, as long as it is part of the Eurozone or also the European Union. So it's not sufficient to change the political approach in your own country. You need to have a European majority amongst governments to change things in your own country. So this is what we call in this book a multi-level or multi-layer approach. Sorry about that. But it's true. It's a multi-layer approach. You have to work always on both levels, the European level and the national level. And the punchline is that things at the European level will not change as long things in individual countries do not change. So it's a mutual dependency of changes on both levels. And the most important and crucial question is, that obviously things have to change in Greece and in Spain. I mean, this is rotten. What in Greece in particular, it's rotten. The whole system is rotten. So many things have to be changed in Greece, but also in Italy. Italy is equally rotten, though it's economically much stronger than Greece. No comparison. It's a different league. Things have to be changed in these countries, but equally important, even more important, things have to be changed in Germany. So in Germany, there is a need to develop a new approach to social and economic policy in order to give more leeway for other countries to develop their own alternative approaches. So this is what makes things so complicated in Europe, and why many people are not so optimistic about the near future of the economic and social system on our continent. And what really holds things together for the time being is that belief that we need a European Union after these dreadful wars and all that. It's obvious. Most people would agree. But the way how to bring things together is extremely complicated, and what is at stake really is the very concept from the very beginning in the 1950s that political integration will follow economic integration. I mean, this is really the basic concept, has been the basic concept from the very beginning in Europe, which is understandable, but this logic, this rationale has been undermined and virtually destroyed by neoliberalism, because neoliberalism drives people into opposition against the European project. So the whole thing is at stake, really. I think I don't exaggerate, and if we are lucky, it survives, that project survives. But, I mean, the way out of the crisis is a task which is, for the moment, a bit too big and too what should I say, too big a task for the left in European countries. So this is why it's really an open situation we are facing. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much.